Hi everyone, my name is Architect Argel Kalanday and this is Space Planning 101. So why is space planning really important? Number one is it's the backbone of any architectural plan. So in any plans that we are doing, whether it's small scale, residential, to a very complicated one, space planning is the in a fundamental steps in accomplishing greater architectural plans. Number two, it will always decide how you will plan the spaces efficiently. So, in space planning, you are always required to analyze carefully the spaces within the building and make collect information regarding the spaces that will be provided in the architectural plan and comparing it also with the customer or client's needs. Number three is it's a great architecture. Great architecture starts from an efficient and functionally organized space. So any kind of architectural plan starts with the fundamental of space planning. It really starts with how you organize your space well at the beginning of conceptualization. Space planning organizes the space, furnishings, and functions to work together to best serve the demands of the end users. So it's simple act of organizing space, the furnishings or the furniture, and the functions to work. The functions or what will be the use of the certain space na ilalagay nyo doon sa building ninyo. So function. Space planning is a detailed examination of how physical space is utilized in constructions. So space planning could be immediately visualized in a physical manner, in a three-dimensional manner. Why? Because at the beginning of the conceptualization, you will have to visualize how you will proportion or detail a specific volume of space in an architectural plan. What will be the mood and psychology behind the volume? So, does it evoke monumentalism? Um, does it evoke various moods that can affect the users? Space planning ensures that floor space is used efficiently and not wasted. So, in the business side of architecture, space is equals to money invested in you by the client. So you have to carefully analyze, utilize the spaces, and make it as efficient as possible. That's the role of the architects. An efficient and well planned, organized space plan is produces happy clients. Space planning, how space planning should be interpreted. How space planning should be interpreted. First is the functional and zoning. Analysis of space, how the areas are identified. So in a residential settings, there are four types of zones. Number one is the public or the social zone, in which you are the zone or the space caters social activities like entertainment room, living room, etc. In a residential house. Number two is the private zones. In a residential home, this could be compared to bedrooms, offices. And number two is the work zones. Work zones materialize into a residential setting could be the kitchen, the laundry area, the dirty kitchen, and then the storage like built-in cabinets, walk-in closets, etc. So those are the zones in a residential zone. So diagramming also is the process of placing two or three dimensional graphical presentation of the proposed space on paper. So we will tackle that diagramming on the next parts. So this is an example. This image is an example of a bubble diagram to a finished floor diagram. As you can see from the number one, the architect conceptualized three category of zones: private zone, work zone, and social zone. And then he refined that spaces into a detailed ones. So for the working zone, that would be the kitchen and dining. For the social, that would be the living, the gaming room. The private, that would be the bed, bath, etc. So that is how that from that category of space developed into a branches of different spaces. So refined to show the zones divided into rooms and their relationship to one another. And then number three is in this one, the architect has that rough idea or a rough idea of proportion of the spaces that he wants to present to the client. So an architect or us architect should be really aware of the proper measurement. So I really suggest that you read now Max Fajardo's Planning and Designers. That is what you needed. And the building code of the Philippines. So for the living area, usually the standard that I am that in my own profession, I use 4 by 4 for a living room. That is the standard or the minimum. And then for the bedroom, according to the National Building Code, that would be a minimum of 6 square meter for habitable rooms. So 3 by 2, but in any cases, clients will be mad at you because 3 by 2 is such a small space. So you will be required to adjust it according to their needs. For example, a bedroom just composed of a simple bedroom in most of my project composed of a bedroom, of course, a TV rack for the master bedroom, and then built-in cabinets and their own toilet and bath. Okay, so 3 by 2 is such a small space. And then let's proceed to the fourth one. So that before we proceed at the fourth one, so bear in mind that in planning you have to have the initial idea of proportions when it comes to the block diagram. So you will know how big space a big of a space at the early phase of your designing. You have that rough idea how big of a space that that specific room entails. Okay, so number 4, floor plan clearly defines architectural elements such as walls. So the number 4 would be the rough sketch of the structure. So as you can see, the progression from the bubble diagram to the rough schematic floor plan of a building. How space planning should be interpreted. And number two is the dimension, shape of the space. So as I am saying, architects should have the basic idea of how big of the space should be. So basing from the codes, basing from the Max Fajardo's book, you will have a rough idea how big a space can be when it comes to residential settings. Also, it would be really helpful if you study the basic furniture dimensions, which is also in the Max Fajardo's book. So, according to Nielsen, 80% of the available size is allocated to the living space, 10% for the passage, and 10% for storage. So, 10% passage, it means the circulation space, how the people will move from that initial space, and then 10% for the storage, for the utility spaces, for the built-in cabinets if it's in a residential setting, and then 80% for the living spaces, which entails the living room, kitchen, dining, bedrooms if it's in a residential setting. How space planning should be interpreted, site orientation, and climate. Of course, as an architect, you will need also to study not only what are you planning inside your structure, but also caring to consider the environment outside your structure. So that entails site orientation and climate. So sa site, you have to check the following: topography, existing history, if that's an agricultural land, the soil or the status of the soil, or uh, the bedrock or the foundation should be much deeper because mas soft yung round area, or if it's an agricultural land. Existing history of flooding, kung umabaha ba dun sa lugar. Types of soil. So, if it's a mountain soil, syempre mas makapit yung pundasyon pag yun. And then, kapag naman mabuhangin, so may tendency din na mag-slide yung foundation. So, you will need feeling for your site. So, sa orientation, so saan ba yung northing mo? So, of course, you will consider the proper daylighting, kung paano mo may papapasok yung araw sa loob ng space mo. Passive cooling, saan yung prevailing winds? Usually northeast and southwest lang naman yan. So, you have to maximize that, orienting to those spaces that needs it, especially on the bedrooms, especially on the living rooms, especially on any social zones in, of course, when we are just talking about the residential buildings. Okay. So if your project will be a commercial building, say for example a mall, and that is operated by by solar energy, so you have to specifically located or orient your solar panels. Climate, of course, typical weather patterns. So typical weather pattern. So in the construction period kasi, if you have started constructing on a rainy season, so of course there will be a tendency that your building materials will be priced much higher. So yun, kino-consider din yun. And then weather pattern, ano pa? Weather pattern, do you go with the design of accepting more heat in your building, or reducing heat? So yun, weather pattern. Roofing design consideration. So are you located on a windy location? So if not, so it is advisable. So if not, syempre, it's advisable that you use mas mababang slope ng roof. No. Oh, yes pala. So, kapag kasi mas mahangin, ang tendency, ang kailangan mong gawin is much steeper na roof height. So kung mapapansin nyo din sa mga arid climates, gumagamit sila ng flat roofs. Furnitures, of course. So kung maglalagay kayo ng mga kahoy na furnitures in your interior, then also that's a problem. Materials to use in your veneers, facade. So if you're going to use also wood designs, so yun, you have to carefully analyze or consider those things. Stretching space. So these are some tips on how you can make small spaces bigger. So use of open plans. Okay. Use of half walls or transparent walls. So half walls means hindi siya buo. Extensive use of windows and glass indoors. So, yun. So, pag madami daw windows, glasses, mas malaking tignan ng isang maliit na space. So, another tip for vertical spaces, if you want it to be extra larger. So, using of light colors. So, light colors tends to recede and dark colors tends to be advancing. Kaya, receding colors make it much more bigger. Smooth textures expand space. Wall-to-wall floor coverings make the floor area appear more extensive. Strong vertical lines direct the eye upwards. So vertical lines. So parang illusion lang. Floor to length window treatments can make walls look taller. Okay. Bigger windows is bigger space. Use of horizontal holdings can give the impression of greater width. Okay. Small scale furnishings make the space appear more giant. So, yung paggamit ng mga moldings na mas maliliit. Okay. Mirrors can be positioned to expand space. Okay, ito, na-apply ko na to one of my projects and it's really effective. Lalo na kung high ceiling pa siya. Use of small scale pattern or no pattern at all. Use of glass tables and other transparent materials. Yes. Furnishings that show their legs rather than upholstered skirts. So yun, some tips. Stretching space, making large areas appear smaller. So dark colors naman daw make spaces seem smaller. So yun nga, advancing colors. Heavy textures reduces space. Furniture can be arranged into several functional or conversational groupings. So of course, ang example nito is a sofa set in a living room. So if your living room is a bigger living room, so ang tendency, ang normal, isang sofa set lang ang gagawin natin. But para daw mas maging mas malaki, mas maging mas maliit ang space, so magdagdag tayo ng another set of sofa. An area rug can divide the space into separate areas or emphasize furniture groupings. So yun, paglalagay na mat. Use of heavy of large scale furnishing. So the bigger your furnishing, the smaller the space you will have. Use of large scale pattern. Because of an illusion that it will produce. Use solid furniture to the floor or soft furnishing with upholstered skirts. So kanina, para daw mas maging maluwang ang maliit na space, mas gumamit ng mga sofa set na litaw yung paa. So ngayon naman daw, itago daw yung mga paa. Circulation pattern as the next consideration or in space planning. So, circulation pattern is the most, I think, one of the vital consideration when it comes to space planning. So, this is called the traffic flow. So, this will dictate how your rooms will be adjacent to one another. This will dictate the form of your building also, and this will dictate uh, the accessibility of your spaces from one another. So in hospitality designs, commercial and office building designs, there are three kinds of traffic flow. Number one is the public traffic flow, two is the employees traffic flow, and three is the utility and maintenance traffic flow. So this traffic flow should be separated from one another. So from the word itself naman, it's public for the users of the building, employee for the workers, and then utility maintenance. This includes the 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 janitorial department, the delivery, the back of the house facility group, the mechanical, electrical, and so on and so forth. So in circulation, there are things that you should avoid, or what we say you have to a red flag when it comes to space planning. So rooms that act as hallway, providing the only access to other rooms. So for example nito is yung hallway leading to a bedroom, and then you enclose it with doors. So syempre tatanggalin mo na yung door so that everyone can have easy access to that bedroom. Usually wala naman talagang doors yun, but for other special buildings like mental hospitals, nilalagyan yun, and emergency rooms. Pero if we are just talking about residential buildings, then you don't have to provide privacy on a hallway. Areas too small to accommodate furniture and circulation. So of course, common sense naman na you have to allocate as an adequate space where people can comfortably circulate around the room. Door locations that force circulation through conversation furniture groupings. So, in English architecture, this is really common, but I am a fan of open space planning, so I am fond of open type living rooms. So it provides greater daylight, number one, and then number two, provides it gives a sense of it gives a feel of a wider, para mas malaki yung room when you are using open planning. Then door location, yun. So in any living room, sa akin kasi I always do it like in space planning, open plan talaga. Traffic where private areas or untidy work areas are open to view. So for example naman ito is bathrooms. All in a residential setting, we always plan dining room adjacent to the kitchen and of course the bathroom. So always use at least at a half wall, just just enough for it to hide the door of the bathroom. So Yun, some example. Storage. So, in any type of building, storage is hindi siya nawawala. So, some examples of this is, yun nga, entrance hall for coats, shoes, scarves, and gloves. So, nilalagyan natin siya lagi ng storage. That's why kung makikita nyo yung mga movies noong 1900s, mga James Bond, so makikita nyo lagi na nagtatanggal sila ng coat. Meron silang coat hanger near the entry. Kitchen for food, cookware, crockery, appliances, cleaning products. So, laging terno yan, no? Kapag ka-kitchen, always meron siyang built-in cabinet for storing. Utility or laundry room for washing machine, dryer, mops, brooms, vacuum. Okay? Linen cupboard for towels, bed linen. Of course, a hot water tank. So, ito, usually nilalagay ko sa ilalim ng love. So, merong nabibili sa Wilcon na ganyan, na merong cabinet na kasama yung lavatory. So, yun. It acts also as a storage. Bedroom wardrobes and cupboards for clothing. That's why hindi nawawala sa residential sa mga bedrooms yung walk-in closets. Next. Permanent fixtures. So, permanent fixtures are fixtures that is always considered at the first part of the planning. So, these are things na if you have modified it during the construction, it will cost an additional for the client because it's permanent. It's what is already considered at the beginning stage of the schematics. So some examples of this are permanent fixtures in a residential setting. These are kitchen, countertops, built-in cabinets. So those are permanent fixtures. Toilet and bath, a water closet, lavatory, shower. So once na sa construction phase, pag may pinabago si client, architect, gusto ko lumaki yung bathroom ko, additional cost yun. Because initially, pinlano mo yon na kasama ng floor plan, pinirmahan ni client. Then kapag ka nagpabago si client, pagpapalaki ng bathroom, you have to give them an additional slip or form or agreement na nagsasabi na you are requesting for additional funding for the request that they are requiring you. So usually ganyan yung mga clients, pag nakita nila na sa drawing malaki, pero pag nakita nila sa actual maliit, papalakihan nila. So huwag kayong papayag ng ganon. So kaya tayo merong contract document signing, pre-design phase for those specific reason. So once they have agreed, they have signed and sealed the complete plan, they have agreed to the dimensions specified in the complete plan. Okay? Next. Of course, we need to consider the elderly or disabled users. So this is what we call universal design, accessibility. That's why we have a law protecting them that is called BP 344 or Accessibility Code. So some of the examples that I have, these images are not mine. It is screenshotted or print screened from a scanned book of Max Fajardo. So this one, minimum ramp distance, minimum ramp distance, 1 is to 10. So as you can see, 6.60 is equals to 6 meters long of ramp or 10% slope. Okay, you will get the proportion. See? So parking area, as you can see, our standard is 250 centimeter. Now, it is for the disabled or elderly 3.3 to 3.6 meters. And then also a walkway of 1.8 meters minimum. Average clearances, 0.80 for those adults that requires them support when walking. The turning wheelchair dimension. Okay, the turning space, this is really important when you are designing hallways for house, home for the aged. Yan, that's the right term. Home for the aged. So if you are required to do a two-person hallway, so you will know the dimension of the hallway. Horizontal reach, if you are designing sinks, lavatories, countertops. So this is a reference. Space clearance, 1.2 for the width, for the length, and 0.75 for the width. Okay, emotion and psychology. So I know that you have tackled this on the architectural interiors, but we're just going to review it now. So space planning also entails those. So space also evokes certain moods and emotion depending on their shape. So is it tall? Is it long? So the size, okay, the scale, the materials, the colors, the textures. So some example, small spaces inhibits confinement, security, belongingness. So that's why we introverts, as introverts love spending my time on bedroom because that's where I am mostly secured at. Then large spaces, it entails freedom. Tall spaces, exhilaration, awe. Application of principles of design. So harmony, emphasis, rhythm, balance, and scale. This is tackled also in your TOA. But yeah, we're going through with it and I'm just going to give you examples. Scale and proportion. So be sure that when you are designing spaces, it's configured to a human scale. Harmony, so it depends on the form, but usually this is the form wherein it is uniform, following only a uniform shape. Emphasis can be seen in plans at social functions. So emphasis, let's say I'm just gonna give an example, ballroom hall. So some of the social spaces, they are much monumental in height and in the shape. So usually, mas mataas yung height compared to the other rooms when we are just talking about social gatherings. So that provokes emphasis. Rhythm, so modular designs, if you can, pag nakakita na kayo ng row house, that is an example of rhythm. So modular design, it has just one type of format of design and plan. Balance, one part is like the other part. So, symmetry, in other words. Skillful use of designs. So, shape. So skillful use of designs. As a designer, you will always have the freedom to express your aesthetic configuration, but having also to consider the functionality of a space. So, the shape, you configure the form, the structure, the mass, how tall is the structure, or how tall is the structure. So, the mass, usually taller spaces are those type of buildings in social gatherings like the auditorium. You can see that it's just a single story, but the height of it is maybe 2 to 3 stories high, depending on the space, the occupant load of the structure. The light, play of light, the interior and the exterior. So as architects, we also consider that during our initial design phases. So how will the light behave when it contacts our exterior designs and interior designs? Line may serve as emphasis, guide of the eye. That's why yung kaninang guides, verticality, and then horizontality promotes verticality promotes the height, and then horizontality designs promotes the width, spacious design. Pattern, accent. So usually patterns are seen in Islamic type of designs. You can see that in their facade. Color, light versus dark. Okay, light, receding colors, dark, advancing color, rather. So, accent, foreground, and background. So, typically, you can see this on the color scheme of a specific buildings. Usually, if modern design, simplistic, neutral colors. If Art Deco, there will be one accent of color, and so on and so forth. Textures, smooth versus dark. Smooth, usually applied on modern type of architecture. Smooth designs, neutral design, simplistic, minimalistic. Versus dark colors. Dark colors are seen heavily on Gothic architecture, usually on those types of buildings. Okay, part 2 is space planning as a design process. Space planning as a design process. So as an architect, it is really important to it is one of the creative process that we take part when we are just starting our project or the pre-design phase of a certain project. So in here, I will explain the step-by-step process on how we conceptualize architectural spaces from rough sketches into a polished, detailed one. So the first part of the design process in a space plan or efficient space planning is first collecting information. So in a professional setting, this will be conducted through the first initial meeting of the client. Usually, you will program what does the client wants or his ideas about the project, and collating those data into a program. So, so in a design project, every client has different needs and different wants. So, one of the most important job of an architect is to listen very carefully to their clients. So, it's critical to conduct extensive research and consider as many areas of space use as possible during the early design stages. So these are the questions that you will have to ask yourself during the collection of information. Do the spaces serve a certain purpose or require specific shape or forms? So usually, uh, on the top of my head, I can give you an example. So auditoriums require certain shapes in order for the sound to propagate efficiently, or the acoustic, what they call it. Okay, so it requires a certain shape. So that's an example. Is it necessary for spaces to be adaptable or have many forms of use? Usually, in a typical setting, for example, let's say it's a government building. So, so, so one space can conduct different kinds of activities. So, in a layman's term, it will be called a multipurpose room. So, you have to know also if that space would be used for other activities as well. Do the spaces demand different levels of light, ventilation, view, and accessibility? Okay. So usually, rule of thumb, if it's a bedroom in a residential planning or residential design, it requires adequate ventilation and light. What ties must each spaces have? No. Is it necessary for any of the places to have a certain level of security or privacy? This can apply to bank planning and design. So, yeah, the first consideration and consider a design consideration that is utmost important is the strategic location of the vault. So it must really be secured because it holds all the money in the bank. Okay? What ties must each space have to one another and to the surrounding environment? So, say for example, your site is located on Antipolo with a great view. So, of course, you have to consider that view as a consideration in your planning. So, what spaces should be strategically located on that part? What connection should be made between the spaces? Okay, so this can apply to complex buildings. So usually if it's a retreat center, or if retreat center, have you gone to Baguio? Baguio teachers camp. So you can see the connections there. They or just in Sumakab, no, the connection of the open pathwalks to from one building to another, since it's a complex structure building. Which room should be adjacent to one another and which should be isolated? So again, the analysis of the spaces if, and the proper zoning. So an example of some questions to consider if you are designing a residential unit. What is the size, okay, the demographics of your clientele? How many are the users of the structure? Location of the site. So where is it located? Is it in the suburbs? Is it on the commercial district? Is it on a subdivision? Number of levels, how many stories? Is it one story, two story, three story? Family or individual interests and activities are the head of the family, a businessman, head of the family, a corporate worker, maybe a farmer, that. Okay, once you have collected the information, you have to interpret the requirements. So when considering how to design spaces and accommodate individuals in such spaces, we might consider certain universal themes relating to how people interact with their surroundings. So in this one, you will have to imagine the spaces as if they are connected to one another. So once you have know or have the proper information of what spaces are required, so you have to ask yourself the initial questions are, should they be adjacent to one another, should be uh, open to everyone, or should they be should they have privacy? So how will the spaces be connected from one from different sources of traffic circulation to a major one and vice versa? So another one is combination versus should the spaces be combined or should they be uh, apart from one another? So I can only imagine that this setting in design is usually applied to complex buildings. So usually this white areas promotes other spaces or view. Integration versus segregation. So another thing about the privacy. So from one spaces are to another, or should they be connected in some way or should they be private? And then openness versus seclusion. So should should be a space be very private, intimate, or open? Then spaces, how spatial relationship, how are the spaces should be related? So these are the theories in TOA: space within a space, interlocking spaces, spaces linked by a common space, adjacent spaces. So space within a space, I can only imagine this applied to cigarettes. Then in the interlocking spaces, if one space should be kindly introduced to a bigger space. So I can only imagine vestibules, entry ports, etc. And then space linked by a common space, maybe applied to office buildings having gardens at the center of their buildings. And then adjacent spaces could be condominium buildings with a hallway. Then after you have considered or know how the space will be related from one another, then you organize the space. Consider the following while designing your spaces. What effect does the envelope have on the inside spaces? So more on the daylighting, passive cooling. So how will the sunlight affect also the users? How will the room's content be organized? So does the owner have requirements or provision when it comes to entertainment when they are lying in bed, or additional office space when space if they are working at home? Do the rooms have a connection? So connection towards one another should be should they should they have intimate privacy, or should be semi open to other visiting person? What is the circulation's flow? Should they be uh, should have should they have mm, centralized circulation, clustered? Uh, should they be uh, have specific circulation flow that the owner wants to have only for delivery purposes? Those kind of situation. Are the space proportions comfortable? Of course, if it depends on the human scale also. So if so, don't design as a smaller space for foreign nationalities like Americans. So lesson learned. So if you're going to design, uh, I have if you're going to design a space for them, it should be much bigger. So these are also some of the concepts. So if you're going to organize the space, one way is through centralized organization. Linear. I can only imagine this uh, through imagine this na modular yung designs. Radial can be applied to urban planning at the intersections. Cluster, okay, so maybe on architectural single building cluster. Grid, if you are going to design a much complex planning. So then after you relate the space to one another, you develop the circulation. So these are the questions that you have to ask yourself when you are just developing the circulation. So how adequate is the circulation in moving from A to B? So efficiency. So yung pag travel ko ba from A to B is much longer or much shorter? Is there a discrete circulation? So meron ba na discreteness? So are you going to pass a certain space muna bago ka makarating, or separated from those space? Fluidity. Is there a conflict between the circulation route and the furnishing requirements. Fluidity. And then after you have carefully carefully analyze the relationship, the how the spaces will be connected to one another, it's time you create a diagram. So the relationship diagram transforms your design from the data you have collected to a more visual representation of how to physically plan out your floor plan. So from the initial inputs that you have gathered, from the studies that you have done on your programming, then it's time to create now your bubble diagram. So in this bubble diagram, you can see that the strong bold arrows represented the main entrance. The bold lines represent the circulation path of the main areas of the building, which are the bigger bubbles, and then the ancillary spaces represented by smaller bubbles, and the ancillary traffic flow represented by a lighter lines, and then the hidden arrow lines representing the access outside the space. As your sketch diagrams develop, you can begin to build a rough sketch plan of your spaces. This is sometimes known as bubble diagramming. So that's what I've said. So the bubble diagram helps you make the connection between basic spatial requirements and a fully drafted floor plan. So bubble diagram also helps in studying constraint of an existing building. So if your project is an existing building and you have to make studies or renovation with it, just print out the plan and then draw out some of the layout that you are picturing in your mind based on basing also from all the information that you have gathered firsthand. That is the way. But if you are just designing new buildings, the bubble diagram can often be connected with your concept. What is your design concept and your site analysis? So it's really important to pinpoint exactly the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats in your site analysis. The strengths, this is discussed in your lower years, I guess. So you have the idea of how you pinpoint exactly the SWOT analysis, and then the basic solar orientation could be seen also in your site analysis. The prevailing winds, and so on and so forth. Okay, bubble diagram. Don't forget this. This is the basic layout you can do when you are initially starting your floor plan. So it's the mother of all plans. So it is often helpful at this phase to have a broad notion of the size needs of specific regions. For example, in a residential residence, knowing the approximate size of a double bedroom or an average living room is helpful to begin making sense of the room. So after you have done your basic layout, you have to imagine now how big the space will be on the actual floor plan. So you have to have that rough image of the floor plan. Experiment with various alternatives and arrangement, and sketch your thoughts about how the spaces will link to one another. So make notes on each choice as you go through it, noting any pros and disadvantages, benefits, and so on, so that you can discard options that you don't think will work at a later stage. So that's why you do not just stop with one bubble diagram. You have to create more and more options. That is a part of the creative process the architects undergoes through the initial design process. So you can't skip that. You have to pick the best layout, the best, the most perfect layout as possible, collating or basing from the information or basing from the wants of your client to uh, um, to reflecting back towards your professional expertise and knowledge about the proper planning, and continue producing those options until you are satisfied with the layout. So again, it's really important to note the pros and cons of each individual bubble diagram in order for you to decide on how you can improve the other options from this option, from the latter option. And then the last, sorry, then the last process is review and revise. So it's not just a linear method. This design process, you have to constantly strive for a better plan, for a better options that you can present to your client. So in reviewing and revising your bubble diagram, you have to ask the following question: how will the occupants move from room to room? So is the distance too far, too near, too adjacent? Do they have room for exits, and so on and so forth? Does the circulation cut up the space? Is so kanina meron tayong rule of thumb 80-10-10. So 80 for the spaces, 10% for the circulation spaces. So does your space have more than 10% of the total area of your building area? If so, then consider revising. Does guest traffic flow through private areas? So that's what I am saying a little bit earlier, that the public space should be separated to the employee space. So that also applies to the guest traffic flow and through the private areas as well. Are the doors and windows in suitable positions? Do they interfere or add to the overall spatial plan? So windows, usually doors are always located at the corner of a room, and windows should be strategically positioned also, maximizing the view from the interior to the outside. So you have to carefully think about how you position these windows and doors. Does the plan orientate itself through correctly with the site? So does so did you carefully consider the light composition, the prevailing winds in the site before you plan it? So that's why you need site analysis before starting any plan, any bubble diagram. Do the rooms work well with one another? So does the ancillary spaces support the main spaces, like what we are discussing in our example just moments ago? the storage, the cupboards, the cab, the the cabinetry through the storage to the refrigerator. Do they align with one another? Are they near enough to one another to have easy access, smooth working, smooth working process is experienced by the user? So you have to ask yourself. Once you have reviewed your initial sketches and ideas, the plans can be developed further by adding more detail and refining your drawings. It is vital to refer to any building regulations, codes, and standards that will impact your space planning to ensure that your design is compliant from an early stage. So, once you have the rough sketch of your buildings, try to visualize, try to um, apply the regulations codes. That's why you have to be knowledgeable on the National Building Code of the Philippines. Is your plan complying to all of the rules and regulations of the code? That's why you have to review your Rule 7 and Rule 8, the National Building Code of the Philippines. To our last, how will I apply efficient space planning in my design? So we will have an activity today. So this is entitled How Will I Apply Efficient Space Planning in My Drawings? So first is the format of the title block that you're going to use. So please follow this title block in creating your drawing. Materials you will be using A3 paper with proper title block, drafting tools, pencil, unipin, or tech pen. Rendering materials could be pens, watercolors, color pencil, etc., whichever you are comfortable at. Instructions: submit until 5 p.m. today. Submit to Google Classroom in a landscape orientation format, not portrait of the image. I grade based also on the quality of the image, so enhance your picture submissions. Don't forget to hand in your submission. So there are students that always forgets handing in their their outputs. So don't forget to hand in because late submission is equals to deduction of points. And of course, non-compliance to my set of instructions, I will uh, return your submission back to you. Project title: Two-story residential mixed-use building. The project brief: a recently married couple bought an inside lot of a 375 square meter lot area in Fort Bonifacio with a frontage of 25 meters facing a 15-meter wide road right-of-way. The couple decided that the lot would be used for both commercial at the ground level and residential apartments at the second level. With their decision to accommodate 3 tenants for both commercial and residential units, as a designer, you have agreed to present them this at 5 p.m. the initial bubble diagram layout of the building. The space requirements: rentable commercial space, hallway, stairs, fire exit, storage, toilet and bath, anteroom, living room, dining room, kitchen, bedroom 1, bedroom 2, walk-in closet, laundry room, balcony, shoe cabinet. Drawing requirements: one bubble diagram for ground floor, one bubble diagram for second floor, and then a note saying play with colors, symbols, line, and arrows. Be creative. For inspiration, go to this link in Pinterest. Thank you for listening to me. Once again, I'm Architect Argel. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'll give you 5 minutes to formulate your thoughts so that you can formulate better your questions. Thank you.